He wore his grandfather's old military jacket every day, quietly enduring the jokes, until a 4-star general recognized the patch and revealed a truth that silenced the entire school. You wouldn't notice him at first, not unless you were looking. 16-year-old Darnell Brooks blended into the background at Jefferson High in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He wasn't the kind of kid teachers raved about or students whispered about. He showed up, kept his head down, turned in his assignments on time, and went home. No drama, no noise, just there, except for the jacket. Every day, no matter the weather, Darnell wore the same worn-out military jacket. Olive green, clearly older than him, with fabric that had softened and lost its stiffness over decades of wear. The elbows were frayed, and there was a thin tear near the right cuff. The collar was permanently creased from years of folding, and a few buttons had been replaced with mismatched ones that didn't quite sit right. But the patch on the chest, that was the only part that stood out clearly. Charlie Cumberby 2nd Battalion. To most students, it looked like something pulled off a thrift store rack. Vintage, maybe. But to some of the louder kids in school, it became an easy target. "Yo, Brooks, your grandpa forget to pick up his jacket. Looks like someone's trying too hard to be a tough guy. Bet that thing smells like a retirement home." They'd tug at the sleeves when he walked past, snicker in the cafeteria, sometimes mock salute him in the halls. Darnell never reacted, not once. He just kept walking, gripping the strap of his backpack a little tighter. The teachers saw it sometimes, but they didn't say much. Maybe they thought he didn't care. Maybe they assumed he was used to it. He wasn't. But Darnell had gotten good at hiding things. He'd learned that silence made you invisible, and invisible was safe. There were days he thought about leaving the jacket at home, just wearing a hoodie like everyone else, fitting in. But every time he stood in front of the mirror in the morning, his hand still reached for the jacket. There was something about it, something he couldn't explain. It made him feel like he was supposed to wear it, like he was carrying a piece of someone who mattered, even if he didn't know that someone very well. Darnell's grandfather had passed away when he was 5. Too young to remember the stories, too old to forget the flag-folded funeral. His mom never said much about her father, only that he served in Vietnam and that the jacket was his. The only thing he left behind, really. That and a photo of him in uniform standing beside a tank with 2 other soldiers, grinning like they didn't have a war ahead of them. That photo sat on Darnell's desk, right next to his charging phone and a broken pen cup. Every once in a while, when he couldn't sleep, he'd look at it and wonder who his grandfather really was, what he'd seen, what kind of man he had to be to come back from that. But the kids at school didn't care about any of that. All they saw was a quiet black kid wearing a jacket too big for him, trying too hard to look like something he wasn't. One afternoon, in the hallway outside the chemistry lab, one of the football players, Ricky Mathers, grabbed the jacket's collar and laughed. "Man, you really think this makes you look cool? What, you trying to be Rambo?" Darnell looked at him. Just looked. No anger, no fear, just something solid behind his eyes. He said nothing. Ricky let go, snorted, and walked off. But that look? It stayed with him. But something else was about to stay with him, something none of them saw coming. It wasn't just teasing. Not really. By junior year, it had morphed into something meaner, quieter, and harder to explain to a teacher. The kind of thing that didn't show up in detention slips or guidance counselor notes. The kind that chipped away at you over time. It started with the jokes. Then came the whispers. Then came the silence when he walked into a room. Darnell never had a real group. He sat near the back in most classes. Not because he liked it, because it was easier not to be noticed. The lunchroom was worse. He always found the same table near the vending machines, where no one sat unless they had to. He ate slowly, carefully, eyes flicking between his tray and the floor. Sometimes the jokes would come from across the room. "Hey Brooks, your war jacket get another medal today?" He probably wears it to bed. I bet he salutes his cereal in the morning. It was mostly the same few kids. Ricky Mathers, of course, Jefferson's pride and joy on the football field, but a different story off it. His girlfriend, Mallory Scott, always laughing just a little too loudly when Ricky said something sharp. And then Tyler Pierce, who didn't talk much but always smirked and nudged the others when Darnell walked by. The kind of kid who watched more than he spoke, but always backed the one who had the upper hand. There were others, too. Kids who didn't say anything, but looked. Some of them probably felt bad, but not enough to speak up. Silence's cousins, Darnell had decided, were comfort and fear. One time, after gym, Darnell found his jacket crumpled in the far corner of the locker room. Someone had stepped on it. Mud streaked across the back. No one admitted anything. No one looked guilty. He picked it up without a word, brought it home, and cleaned it with a damp rag. He didn't tell his mom. He never told her anything about what happened at school. Not when they moved to Harrisburg. Not when she got promoted at the hospital and started working nights. Not when he started eating dinner alone 5 nights a week. She was doing enough. She didn't need to worry about jackets and bullies. Still, he wished, just once, that someone would ask him why he kept wearing it. Ms. Grayson, his English teacher, almost did once. She stopped him after class, eyes soft behind her square glasses. "You okay, Darnell?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah?" She glanced at the jacket, then back at him. "You sure?" He nodded again. "Yeah." She let it go. In history class, they were covering the Vietnam War. Mr. Brewster showed them old clips from the news. Helicopters, jungles, grainy footage of scared young men running through tall grass with rifles. Darnell watched without blinking. No one looked at him during that unit, not even Ricky. One morning during a pop quiz, he saw someone pass a note to Mallory. Her head tilted slightly toward him. The note got passed again, and this time he saw the words, scrawled in pencil like a dare, "General Nobody." Mallory didn't laugh, but she smirked. He finished the quiz, turned it in, and walked out before anyone else. When he got home that night, he took the jacket off and laid it flat on his bed. He stared at the patch again. The stitching was coming loose on the edge. He traced it with his finger. "Why do I keep doing this?" he whispered. But deep down, he already knew. It wasn't about them. Not really. It was about remembering a man he barely knew, wearing something that made him feel connected to something bigger than Jefferson High's lunchroom. Still, it hurt. It hurt more than he let on. But pain doesn't always break you. Sometimes it builds something in silence. Darnell's mother never liked talking about the past. Her name was Patrice, nurse practitioner, night shift, ran on coffee and sheer will. The kind of woman who fixed things without fuss, who didn't have time for complaints. Not because she didn't care, because she couldn't afford to break down. Life had taught her that survival didn't come with a pause button. The jacket used to hang in the back of her closet. For years it stayed there, untouched, sealed in a plastic dry cleaner bag, even though it hadn't been cleaned in decades. Darnell found it by accident when he was 10, looking for a Halloween costume. He pulled it out and tried it on. It hung down to his knees. Patrice walked in, saw him wearing it, and froze. He remembered the way her face changed. Not angry, just still. "You don't play in that," she said. Darnell took it off immediately. "Was it Grandpa's?" She nodded. "He wore it in the war." That was all she said. He asked once, years later, what kind of man his grandfather was. Patrice had been folding laundry. She paused, stared down at a sock in her hand, then shrugged. He came back different, quiet, but he loved hard. That jacket? He never let it out of his sight. Wore it every 4th of July until he couldn't anymore. Darnell pressed her for more. She just shook her head and said, "Some stories stay where they belong," but for Darnell, that jacket didn't feel like just a story. It felt like a weight, not the kind that crushes you, the kind that keeps you grounded. He started wearing it in 8th grade. At first, only once a week. Then twice. By 9th grade, it was almost daily. It was too big in the shoulders, and the sleeves always needed to be rolled up. But he didn't care. It made him feel like he was carrying something important. A flag, maybe. A shadow that meant something. Sometimes, when he got home from school, he'd sit on his bed and scroll through old photos online of soldiers in Vietnam, trying to find faces that looked like the one in the photo on his desk. trying to imagine what it must have been like to walk through a jungle, not knowing if you'd ever come out the other side. One night, curiosity got the better of him. He asked his mum again, "Did Grandpa ever talk about it? Vietnam?" She was stirring pasta in the kitchen. The TV buzzed from the living room. "He talked to my brother once," she said. "Said he lost more friends than he remembered names. Said the smell of the jungle stayed in his clothes for weeks." She dropped the spoon in the sink, rubbed her face. "I think he carried things home that never really left." Darnell didn't ask again, but something shifted in him that night. A quiet understanding. The jacket wasn't just his grandfather's. It was a piece of everything he'd survived, and everything he never got to explain. And maybe, in some strange way, wearing it was like saying, "I see you, even if I never knew you." It made the teasing at school feel smaller. Not gone, but smaller. They didn't get it. That was fine. Not everyone needed to. Still, he couldn't lie. There were days when he wished just one person would look at him and not see a joke, not see a costume, just see the history, the blood, the silence, the meaning. He didn't know it yet, but that wish wasn't as far away as he thought. But sometimes the thing that changes your life doesn't look like a miracle. It looks like a school field trip. The email came on a Wednesday. Subject line, Leadership and Civics Seminar. Selected student participants. Darnell almost deleted it without reading. At Jefferson High, selected student usually meant athletes, student council kids, or the ones who raised their hand in every class. Darnell wasn't any of those things. But curiosity pulled his eyes back. He clicked. There it was. His name. Darnell Brooks. Listed under 4 others from his grade. At first he thought it had to be a mistake. But no. Ms. Grayson had nominated him, quietly, without saying a word. He found her the next morning before class, hovering near her desk. "You signed me up for this?" he asked. She looked over her glasses. "I thought you might get something out of it." He didn't know what to say. She smiled, gentle but firm. Sometimes showing up is louder than speaking up. He didn't argue. The seminar was being held in Washington, D.C., about 2 hours south. One day, one auditorium packed with juniors and seniors from across the state. Jefferson High chartered a bus, sent a few teachers along, and handed out sack lunches like it was just another field trip. Darnell almost didn't go. The night before, he sat on his bed staring at the permission slip, wondering what good would come out of standing in another room where no one knew him, no one listened. But something made him fill it out. Maybe it was Ms. Grayson's voice in his head. Maybe it was just a reason to get out of Harrisburg for a day. The morning of the trip, the sky was gray. The kind of gray that looked like it might snow, or rain, or just hang there without doing anything. Darnell wore the jacket, of course, tied his laces, stuffed a notebook in his bag, and slipped his earbuds in before boarding the bus. The ride was long and quiet. A few kids played games on their phones. Mallory Scott took selfies in the window light. Ricky made jokes in the back with his friends, like always. No one spoke to Darnell. He didn't expect them to. He watched the trees blur past outside. His hand rested on the patch, fingers tracing the edge again, like he was drawing circles on a ghost. They pulled into D.C. just before lunch. The city looked cold, dressed in glass and concrete. Government buildings rose up like monuments, all sharp lines and serious people. The seminar was being held in a massive auditorium near the Capitol. White columns, metal detectors, name badges at the entrance. Darnell's group filed in. He stayed near the back, away from the rows of ROTC cadets in uniform, standing a little straighter than everyone else, away from the kids who took notes before the first speaker even started. The presentations dragged on. Some congresswoman talked about civic duty. A mayor gave a speech about youth engagement. A local police chief made a joke no one laughed at. Then, just after the lunch break, the announcer introduced the next speaker. Please welcome General Catherine Albright, United States Army, retired. The auditorium shifted. She walked in slowly. No uniform, just a black blazer and boots that hit the floor with purpose. Silver hair cropped short, face like stone but not cold. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there, waited for the room to quiet itself, and then started. I've led troops in 3 wars. I've briefed presidents. But today, I want to talk to you about something else, something quieter, the kind of leadership that doesn't need a stage. The room leaned in. Darnell found himself listening harder than he meant to. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Not from volume, from weight. She told stories, not about medals or promotions, about loss, about soldiers who never made it home, about respect. Near the end of her talk, she paused. There's something sacred about the things we carry. Some of it's physical, most of it isn't. Darnell didn't know why, but his throat tightened a little. When it was over, everyone stood to applaud. Some kids rushed to the front to get selfies, others packed up. Darnell stayed still, watching her descend the stairs. She didn't rush out, just walked slowly along the side, nodding at people here and there. Then her eyes caught something. She stopped, walked a few feet toward the back, toward him. She was staring at the jacket. But what she said next would change everything Darnell thought he knew about. She stopped right in front of him, close enough for Darnell to see the lines carved into her face. Not harsh, but lived in. She looked him over, and her eyes settled on the patch. Charlie Company, she said, not asking but knowing. Darnell blinked, swallowed. Yeah. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, more like focus. She stepped a little closer and pointed gently toward the chest. 2nd Battalion, Vietnam era, right? Darnell nodded. It was my grandfather's. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she breathed out, slowly, like she'd just unlocked something in her memory. I haven't seen that patch in a long time, she said. Your grandfather's name? He hesitated. Leroy Brooks. Something flickered in her expression. She didn't smile, but her face shifted. Like she'd just been handed a name from a chapter she thought was closed. Leroy, she repeated. Tall guy, big voice, used to carry extra rations in his helmet. He was with us in Quang Tri, saved my CO's life once. Darnell stared at her. You knew him? I served with him, she said. I was young, fresh out of West Point. Didn't know my left from my right in those first few weeks. Your grandfather showed me how to dig a proper foxhole. We called him Doc, even though he wasn't a medic. He always had something. Aspirin, gauze, dry socks. Whatever you needed, he had it. Darnell didn't know what to say. No one had ever talked about his grandfather like that. Not with warmth, not with respect, not like he was real. I didn't think anyone remembered him, he said quietly. General Albright looked at him with something close to reverence. People like your grandfather don't disappear, son. They stay with the ones they helped walk out of hell. A few students nearby had stopped to listen, unsure of what they were witnessing. Even Ricky, standing halfway up the aisle, froze in place when he saw General Albright reach out and touch the patch gently with her fingers. You wear this often? She asked. Almost every day, Darnell replied. She smiled. Barely, but it was there. Then you're doing him proud. Darnell felt something strange swell in his chest. A mix of confusion, pride, maybe even grief. Like something heavy had been sitting on his shoulders and just shifted into something else. He glanced around, aware now of the eyes. Mallory was whispering to someone. Tyler Pierce was watching from a few seats away, eyebrows raised. General Albright noticed too, but she didn't care. She turned to the nearest teacher and said, "Who's in charge of your group?" "That'd be Mr. Lasker," the teacher said, stepping forward. "Good," she said. "Tell Mr. Lasker I'd like to speak at Jefferson High, and I'd like to talk about Leroy Brooks." The teacher looked stunned. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, General. She turned back to Darnell. Would that be okay with you? He nodded, too stunned to say anything else. She patted his shoulder once. Tell your mother I said thank you. And if she remembers me, I'd love to talk to her too. Then she walked away. No big farewell, no speech. Just a slow, steady pace toward the exit, like she had somewhere more important to be. And maybe she did. The students around him didn't say anything. Not right away. It was like the entire moment had paused. Then Ricky. Yes, Ricky broke the silence. Yo, your granddad knew her? Darnell looked up. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Yeah, he did. Ricky didn't have a comeback. For once, there was nothing smart to say. Darnell turned, walked toward the doors, and stepped out into the hallway. His hand rested on the patch again, but this time, not out of habit, out of pride. But the conversation didn't end there, because by the next morning, his school was already talking. The bus ride home felt different, not louder, just quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Darnell sat by the window again. He didn't look out like usual. This time, he stared down at the patch on his jacket, his thumb resting just beneath it like it had a pulse. The voices behind him were still there. Ricky laughing at something Tyler said. Mallory playing a video with her volume too high. But they didn't reach him the same way anymore. He kept hearing her voice. You're doing him proud. For the first time in a long while, Darnell didn't shrink into his seat. He sat tall, quietly, yes, but taller. Back at school the next morning, something felt off. Not wrong, just off. Ms. Grayson caught him before homeroom. Her tone was calm, but her words came fast. Darnell, can I talk to you? He followed her into the hallway. I got a call last night, she said, from General Albright. His eyes widened. She really called? She did. Spoke to the principal, too. She asked to visit Jefferson and do an assembly. She wants to talk about your grandfather, about Charlie Company, about service, about what legacy means. Darnell didn't know what to say. He looked down at his jacket, then back at her. She's serious? She's already booked a flight, Ms. Grayson said. She'll be here next week. Then she smiled. Something rare and genuine. You don't know it yet, but this is bigger than you. Word got out fast. By lunch, whispers had turned into full conversations. Kids who'd barely looked at Darnell before were now staring. The girl who sat next to him in biology asked if it was true. One of the basketball players nodded at him in the hall. And then there was Ricky. He approached at his locker after sixth period, flanked by Tyler and Mallory. Ricky leaned his shoulder into the metal next to Darnell's, his tone low. Look, man, he said. I didn't know your granddad was like real military. That's pretty wild. Darnell didn't flinch. He just stared at him. He didn't talk about it much, he said. But yeah, he was real. Ricky scratched the back of his neck. I mean, I was just messing around before. You know how it is. Darnell closed his locker. Yeah, he said. I know how it is. Mallory looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. The moment stretched, awkward and bare, until Ricky slapped the locker and said, Anyway, that's cool, man. Then he walked off. Tyler nodded once before following him. Mallory lingered a half-second longer, then turned and left too. Darnell didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He just breathed. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. The following day, the principal made an announcement during homeroom. Next Friday, we will be hosting General Catherine Albright for a special assembly. All students will attend. Parents are welcome. It's an honor to welcome someone of her stature to our school. Please be respectful, be present, and be proud. After the announcement, Darnell heard his name mentioned in 3 different conversations before the first bell rang. A teacher he didn't even know asked if he'd be part of the assembly. The front office called to confirm if his mom could attend. It was all happening so fast, but somehow he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt ready. Later that evening, Darnell and his mom sat across from each other at the small dining table. She sipped tea, still in her scrubs. He told her everything, about DC, the jacket, the general, the assembly. Patrice just listened, didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she nodded slowly. I remember her, she said quietly. She wrote your grandfather once after the war. Thanked him for carrying her out after an ambush. I think he kept that letter somewhere. She stood and disappeared into her room. Came back with a metal tin. Inside, folded and yellowed, was a typed letter. It was signed K. Albright, 2nd Lieutenant, U.S. Army. Darnell held it like it might dissolve in his hands. The words were brief, but powerful. Thank you for reminding me what it means to come home. He looked up at his mother. You think he'd be proud of me? She reached over and touched the patch on his chest, eyes glassy. I know he would. But pride is quiet, and it was almost time for the entire school to hear it loud. The day of the assembly crept closer like something sacred approaching from a distance. Slow, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Posters went up around the school. Guest speaker, General Catherine Albright. Friday, 10 a.m., gymnasium. A few of them had a grainy black and white photo of her from her younger years in uniform. Underneath was a simple line, honoring the legacy of service. By Wednesday, Jefferson High felt different. Students walked a little faster in the hallways, not because they were excited, more like they weren't sure how to act. Even teachers looked sharper, wearing dress shirts instead of polos, heels instead of sneakers. Darnell walked through it all like a calm center of a spinning wheel. He'd never been stared at so much in his life. Not in hate, not in ridicule, but in that awkward, sudden curiosity people get when they realize they'd gotten the story wrong the whole time. Ms. Grayson checked in with him every morning. You holding up? She asked. Yeah, he said. And this time, he meant it. At home, Patrice pressed the jacket flat with her hands the night before the event. She didn't iron it. She said it wasn't right to press creases out of history. He bled in this, she said softly, smoothing the fabric near the shoulder. You wear it. You carry all of it. Darnell listened, quiet. He went to bed early that night. Didn't scroll. Didn't text. Just stared at the ceiling in the dark, wondering what his grandfather would have thought of all this. Wondering if he'd be proud or tell him to stop making such a fuss. But it didn't feel like fuss. It felt like truth finally getting the microphone. The morning of the assembly, the gym was already being set up by 7:30. Teachers unfolded rows of metal chairs while janitors rolled out the podium and cords for the speaker system. The principal was triple-checking his index cards. Darnell arrived early, his jacket zipped up despite the early spring heat. A few parents had started trickling in by 9. Some nodded at him, unsure what to say. Others whispered, clearly having heard parts of the story secondhand. Then at 9:42, a black SUV pulled into the staff lot. General Albright stepped out. No uniform again. Just that same black blazer, black slacks, boots that seemed to click against the concrete with precision. Her hair was neatly brushed, silver and sharp. A school official greeted her at the door, and she politely declined an escort to the stage. I'd like to meet his mother first, she said. They found Patrice standing near the gym entrance. She wore a dark navy dress, a necklace with a cross at the center, and a calm that Darnell had never seen cracked before, until now. When she saw Albright, something shifted in her face. Not quite shock, not quite warmth, just memory, long and deep. It's been a while, Patrice said, her voice steady but soft. General Albright held out her hand. You look just like your father. I can see it in your son. Patrice took her hand, held it. Thank you, she said, and nothing more. 10 minutes later, the gym was full. Students sat shoulder to shoulder, parents lined the back, and every teacher had squeezed into a corner. The buzz of conversation dropped the second the principal stepped to the mic. Good morning. Today is not ordinary. It's rare we get to hear from someone who's lived the kind of life that rewrites history books. But today we do. He turned toward the aisle. Please welcome General Catherine Albright. Applause, then silence. She walked to the stage without notes. No slides, no speech written in bullet points. She looked at the students like she saw every single one of them. Then she looked straight at Darnell. I came here today not to talk about my rank or my medals. I came here because a quiet student in this very school wears a jacket with a story most people forgot. You could hear a pin drop. She told them about Vietnam, not the textbook version, but the mud, the fear, the people. She told them about Leroy Brooks, his humor, his grit, the way he carried more than his share, always. She told them how he pulled 3 people out of a firefight and never once asked for a medal. Your classmate, Darnell Brooks, wears that jacket every day, and most of you never asked him why. Heads turned. A few students shifted uncomfortably. But I did, she said, because some things deserve to be seen, and some people deserve to be remembered. She paused, then gestured toward Darnell. I'd like him to join me. But when he stood up and walked toward the stage, the look on his classmates' faces said everything that words couldn't. When Darnell stood, the sound of the metal chair scraping against the gym floor echoed louder than anything else in the room. He wasn't sure where to look. Some kids avoided his gaze completely. Others locked eyes with him, unsure, curious, maybe even guilty. He took slow steps toward the stage. Not stiff, not afraid, just measured. Like every movement meant something. General Albright stepped back slightly to make space at the podium, but she didn't hand it over. She simply looked at him and said, "Would you mind if I tell them about that day near Khe-Sanh?" Darnell shook his head. "Please," she turned back to the audience. "We were ambushed. The kind of ambush that changes your sense of time. It came from the trees, fast and loud. I was barely 23. Didn't know where the fire was coming from or if I'd make it to the next second. Got hit, just above the knee. Couldn't move." She took a breath, looked at the back wall like it was the jungle. "Leroy, your classmate's grandfather, Matt. He could have stayed in cover. No one would have blamed him. But he didn't. He ran back into the smoke, pulled me out by the straps of my vest, took a hit in the shoulder doing it, wrapped it himself, never talked about it again. You could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just a story to her. It lived under her skin. I would not be standing here if it weren't for that man. And now, his grandson stands beside me, wearing his jacket, not for fashion, not for attention, but to carry something we should all be carrying. Respect." Then she turned, looked at Darnell. "Would you like to say something?" His mouth felt dry. His hands were cold, but he stepped up anyway. He looked out at the crowd, and for the first time in his life, they were truly listening. He took a shallow breath. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "I didn't really know my grandfather. I knew he served. I knew he wore this jacket. That's all I had growing up. A photo, a jacket, some stories I had to guess at." He paused. Eyes scanned the gym, caught a glimpse of Ricky. Arms folded in his lap, watching but not smirking. Mallory sat next to him, hands in her lap. Tyler was still as a statue. "I wore this because it felt like a connection, something solid. People made fun of it, called me names, pulled at it, laughed." He didn't look away. "But I kept wearing it, because it meant something to me. And now I know what it meant to him, too." There was a moment, half a second, where nothing moved. Then applause, not a scattered golf clap. A real rising sound. Even the teachers stood. Patrice wiped one tear, then folded her hands again. General Albright stepped forward once more. "Let this be a lesson in paying attention. The person you're mocking might be carrying more than you'll ever understand. And the quietest one in the room might be wearing the loudest truth." Afterward, the students filed out slower than usual. There was a strange energy. Not excitement, not shame. More like reflection. Something had shifted. Near the gym door, Ricky stopped Darnell. "Hey!" Darnell looked at him. "I was a jerk," Ricky said. "Didn't get it. I do now. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't deep, but it was real." Darnell gave a small nod. "Okay." Mallory stepped forward too. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the notes. For the jokes. Thanks," Darnell replied. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Tyler hung back but gave a small thumbs up before walking off. Ms. Grayson caught him as he passed by her. "You okay?" she asked again, like she had before. This time, Darnell paused. "Yeah," he said. "I think I really am." But change doesn't end in a gym. It keeps walking with you after the chairs are folded and the voices fade. The Monday after the assembly, Jefferson High felt like a different place. The walls hadn't changed. The schedule was the same. The cafeteria still served soggy pizza and overcooked green beans. But the way people looked at Darnell, that had shifted. It wasn't hero worship. No one threw him a parade. And honestly, he wouldn't have wanted that. But the sneers, the whispers, the subtle digs that used to trail behind him in the hallway like a shadow, they were gone. He walked through the main corridor and students moved aside, not out of fear, but awareness. The same people who used to roll their eyes at the sight of that faded jacket now glanced at it differently. Some even nodded. A few said, "Hey," under their breath. Not much, but real. In third period, someone left a folded note on his desk. Inside, it just said, "My brother's in the army. Thank you for wearing that." No name, no handwriting he recognized. But he kept it in his pocket anyway. After school, he was walking home when he heard footsteps behind him. "Hey, Darnell!" It was Ricky. Alone this time. Darnell stopped but didn't turn around right away. When he finally did, Ricky looked different. Not embarrassed, not performative, just earnest. "I meant what I said. I was way out of line before. I didn't get it. The jacket, the whole thing. I thought you were trying to look tough or something." Darnell shrugged. "I wasn't. I know. That's what I didn't get." Ricky glanced down at his own shoes. "I looked up your grandfather after the assembly. Man, that guy was a legend." Darnell gave the faintest smile. He was. There was a beat of silence. Then Ricky asked, "You ever think about joining the military?" Darnell looked at him, surprised. "Not really. Why?" Ricky chuckled. "Just wondering. You got that calm, you know? That kind that makes people pay attention." Darnell didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. They walked for a block in silence. Then Ricky peeled off toward the parking lot where his older brother usually picked him up. That night at dinner, Darnell told his mom about the change, about the note, the conversations, the way things had felt different. Patrice stirred her tea and said, "Sometimes, people need to be reminded where dignity really lives." She tapped the edge of his jacket. "It's not in medals. It's in how you carry things when no one's clapping." Later that night, Darnell sat at his desk and pulled out the old photo of his grandfather again. Same grin, same confidence. But now, it didn't feel like a stranger looking back. It felt like family. He pulled out a notebook and started writing. Not homework, not a journal entry, just thoughts about legacy, about silence, about the weight of things people don't see. For the first time in his life, Darnell didn't feel like he had to explain himself. He'd been seen, not for what others projected onto him, but for who he truly was. And more importantly, who he came from. The jacket still smelled faintly like old fabric and metal, but when he slid it over his shoulders again before bed, it felt like armor. Not the kind you wear to protect yourself from people, the kind you wear to honor the people who already protected you. But stories like this don't end. They keep passing from one voice to another, reminding us why some things should never be forgotten. 3 weeks later, spring finally arrived in Harrisburg. The chill that had clung to the mornings faded, and the sidewalks filled with kids tossing basketballs, riding bikes, and dragging their feet toward school a little slower. But inside Jefferson High, something else had shifted, something less obvious than the change in weather, but just as real. During homeroom, a guidance counselor came into Darnell's class. She handed a flyer to Ms. Grayson and whispered something before walking out. Ms. Grayson read the note, then looked up at Darnell. "Brooks," she said, "you've been invited to speak at the State Youth Civics panel next month, in Harrisburg Hall." The whole room turned. He blinked. "Me?" She smiled. "You." It wasn't even about the military, or his grandfather. The panel was about student voice, about how kids carry meaning in quiet ways, and how those stories deserve a place at the table. General Albright had nominated him personally. Apparently, she'd written a letter about the boy who wore history across his chest without asking for anything in return. Darnell felt something turn in his stomach. Nervousness, maybe. Or responsibility. After class, Ms. Grayson stopped him by the door. "You don't have to do it if you don't want to," she said. "But I think your story could help a lot of people." Darnell didn't answer right away. But he knew. Deep down, he knew he couldn't go back to hiding anymore. Later that day in the cafeteria, Mallory stopped by his table. She sat across from him, arms folded, face serious. "You know," she said, "people are still talking about that assembly." He looked up. "Yeah? Yeah. But not in the way you think. I heard a kid say he asked his dad about Vietnam for the first time after hearing what you and the general said." Darnell didn't know how to respond. She stood up, slung her backpack over one shoulder. "People hear you now," she said. "Don't waste that." Then she was gone. After school, he walked home like always. Same street, same cracked sidewalks, same shortcut through the community garden. But this time, kids called out, "Hey, Darnell!" instead of ignoring him. A neighbor he barely knew gave him a thumbs up. And when he reached his front steps, there was a letter sticking out of the mailbox. It was from General Albright. Typed, dated, signed in real ink. Darnell. "The strength you carry comes from more than your grandfather's jacket. It comes from your decision to wear it, even when it cost you. That choice, that quiet conviction, is what makes you a leader. If ever you need a recommendation, a reference, or just someone who remembers where you came from, you've got my number. Catherine Albright, General, retired, U.S. Army." He read it twice. Then again, then tucked it into his desk drawer next to the old photo and the yellowed letter from decades ago. That night, he stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. The jacket still hung from his shoulders, sleeves rolled up like always. But he didn't see just fabric anymore. He saw a story he'd helped carry forward. One that wasn't just about war or teasing or being overlooked. It was about quiet legacy, about earning respect without shouting for it, about walking through the world with weight and never letting it break you. And when he sat back down at his desk, he opened the notebook again. He wrote, "Some things speak louder when you don't explain them. The jacket, the patch. It was never about pretending. It was about remembering. And sometimes remembering is enough to change a room, or a person, or a whole school." That was the lesson. The moral that didn't come in a lecture or a poster, but in a glance, a question, a story. If you're lucky, someone sees the weight you carry. If you're brave, you keep carrying it even when they don't. And if you're wise, you make sure the next person doesn't carry it alone. If this story moved you, share it. There's someone out there wearing their own version of that jacket, quietly, patiently, and maybe even painfully. Let them know they're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories that honor the people we too often overlook, don't forget to subscribe.